I watched my mother tuck the envelope into her purse, the one with my biopsy results, and check her watch for the third time in 5 minutes. "We really need to leave now if we're going to make it to Vanessa's showcase," she said, not looking at me. "The traffic on the highway is going to be terrible." My father was already at the door, keys jangling. "Come on, Helen, you know how she gets if we're even 5 minutes late." I sat on the examination table, still wearing the hospital gown, the paper crinkling beneath me. Dr. Morrison stood in the corner, her face carefully neutral, but I could see the tightness around her eyes. She'd just told us, that we needed to discuss concerning findings and next steps immediately. "Mom," I said, my voice small. "She said it was important." My mother finally looked at me, and for a moment I thought I saw something flicker across her face. Guilt? Concern? But then it was gone, replaced by that familiar expression of mild irritation. "Bailey, don't be dramatic. We'll reschedule for next week. Vanessa has been practicing for months, and this is the regional finals. You know how much this means to her career." Her career. Vanessa was 14. I was 19 and apparently dying, though they hadn't said that word yet. But I could read Dr. Morrison's face. I'd learned to read faces over the years. It was a survival skill when your own family looked through you like glass. "Mrs. Chen, I really think," Dr. Morrison started. "We'll call on Monday to reschedule," my mother interrupted, already heading for the door. "Come on, Bailey, you can change quickly, can't you? We might still make the opening number if you hurry." I changed in a daze. My hands shook as I buttoned my jeans. There was a lump, that's what they'd called it. A lump in my left breast, and the mammogram had shown irregularities. And now there were biopsy results that apparently could wait because Vanessa's pirouettes could not. The drive to the Performing Arts Center was silent, except for my father's commentary on traffic and my mother's increasingly frantic texts to Vanessa's dance instructor, apologizing for potentially being late. I sat in the back seat. I always sat in the back seat, and stared out the window at the blurring trees. This wasn't new. This was the pattern of my entire life, crystallized into one perfect, terrible moment. When I was 7, I'd fractured my wrist falling off the monkey bars. We'd sat in the ER waiting room for 6 hours because my parents had to attend Vanessa's first piano recital. By the time we got there, the swelling was so bad they'd had to re-break it to set it properly. When I was 12, I'd won second place in the state science fair. My parents missed the awards ceremony because Vanessa had an emergency dance practice. The emergency was that she wanted to add an extra fouetté to her routine. When I was 16, I'd gotten into Stanford with a full scholarship. We celebrated with takeout, eaten in the car in the parking lot of Vanessa's dance studio while we waited for her private lesson to finish. And now at 19, I was apparently dying, and even that couldn't compete with a regional dance showcase. We made it with 10 minutes to spare. I watched from the audience as Vanessa performed her contemporary piece, something about butterflies and transformation, full of dramatic arm movements and controlled falls. She was good, I could admit that. She'd inherited our mother's grace and our father's discipline. What had I inherited? The ability to be invisible, apparently. After the showcase, Vanessa placed third, which led to tears and accusations that the judges were biased. We went to her favorite restaurant. Italian, expensive, with a wait list my father had somehow circumvented through a business connection. Vanessa held court at the head of the table, analyzing every aspect of her performance, what she could have done better, how the girl who'd placed first had clearly peaked and would never improve beyond that. I pushed pasta around my plate and felt something dark and cold settling in my chest. It might have been despair. It might have been the tumor, if that's what it was, growing, spreading, killing me cell by cell while my family debated whether Vanessa should switch to a more prestigious dance academy. "You're quiet, Bailey," my father said suddenly, and I realized everyone was looking at me. "Just tired," I said. "Well, don't stay up too late studying," my mother said absently. "You know how you get when you don't sleep enough." I almost laughed. What was I supposed to say? "Actually, Mom, I might have cancer, remember? The thing we were supposed to discuss with the doctor today?" But I'd learned long ago that making waves only made things worse. Better to be invisible than to be a problem. That night, alone in my room, the smallest bedroom, the one that had been a home office until Vanessa decided she needed the larger room for her dance practice space, I lay awake and stared at the ceiling. I could hear Vanessa in the room next door, her music turned up loud, the thump of her feet as she practiced her routine again and again, chasing perfection. I wondered what it would be like to be her, to be seen, to be chosen, to matter. The pain started around 2 a.m., sharp, stabbing, radiating from my chest down my left arm. I knew, distantly, that this was bad, very bad. I should call for help, but I was so tired, and some part of me, the part that had been ignored and dismissed and set aside for 19 years, wondered if anyone would even come. I reached for my phone, but my fingers were numb. The room was spinning. The last thing I remembered was the sound of Vanessa's music still playing through the walls, and thinking how ironic it was that I would die to the soundtrack of her success. And then there was nothing. I woke up to the sound of my mother's voice, and for one disorienting moment, I thought I'd been saved, that someone had found me, called 911, that I was in a hospital bed about to begin the fight of my life. "Bailey, get down here right now. We're going to be late." But that wasn't right. That voice wasn't worried or frightened. It was irritated, impatient, the same tone she'd used 1,000 times before. I opened my eyes. I was in my childhood bedroom. Not the small office-turned-bedroom from last night, but my actual childhood bedroom from when I was 13. The walls were painted the pale yellow I'd begged for before Vanessa decided she wanted to redecorate and my mother gave her my paint budget. My bookshelf was full of middle-grade novels. My desk had my old laptop, the clunky one from 2015. My hands were small, smooth, unblemished. I stumbled to the mirror and saw my 13-year-old face staring back at me. The memories hit like a tidal wave, not just of dying, the pain, the darkness, the sensation of slipping away, but of everything that came after. 6 years of being ignored, of being second, of watching my health deteriorate while my family poured every resource into Vanessa's dance career. The diagnosis I'd finally gotten too late when I'd dragged myself to a clinic on my own. Stage 4 breast cancer, metastasized to my lymph nodes, my bones, my lungs. They'd given me 6 months. I'd lasted 4, but now I was here. 13 years old. 6 years before the lump would appear. 6 years before that terrible day in Dr. Morrison's office. 6 years to change everything. "Bailey Chen, if you're not down here in 2 minutes, we're leaving without you." I looked at myself in the mirror, young, healthy, alive, and felt something shift inside me. Not hope, exactly. Something harder, something forged in the fire of being invisible for 19 years and then dying alone while your family slept through it. I got dressed slowly, deliberately, jeans and a t-shirt, not the uncomfortable dress my mother always made me wear for Vanessa's events. When I came downstairs, my mother was at the door, purse in hand, face already pinched with annoyance. "Finally, we're going to hit traffic. You know, today is Vanessa's audition for the Elite Academy. This is crucial for her future." I looked at her, really looked at her. Helen Chen, 42 years old, elegant and poised, with Vanessa's dark hair and sharp features. She was beautiful. She'd always been beautiful. And she'd never once looked at me the way she looked at Vanessa. "I'm not going," I said. The words hung in the air. My mother froze, her hand on the doorknob. "Excuse me?" "I'm not going," I repeated, and my voice was steady. "I have plans." "Bailey, we don't have time for this. Get in the car." "No." I'd never said no to her before, not in my first life, and certainly never as a child. The word felt foreign in my mouth, sharp-edged and dangerous. My mother's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, disbelief, and finally, anger. "Young lady, you do not get to decide." "I'm 13 years old," I interrupted. "I don't need to be at Vanessa's audition. I'm going to Sarah's house to work on our science project." This was technically true. Sarah Martinez had been my best friend in middle school before Vanessa's increasingly demanding schedule had made it impossible for me to maintain friendships. We did have a science project due, but more importantly, Sarah's mother was a nurse, and I needed to talk to her about the genetic markers for breast cancer, about early screening, about prevention. Because I remembered now from those final horrible months in the hospital, when I'd had nothing to do but research the disease that was killing me. BRCA1 mutation, inherited, My grandmother on my mother's side had died of ovarian cancer at 45. No one had ever thought to test me. Why would they? Breast cancer didn't happen to teenagers, but it could. And with early detection, with the right interventions, I could prevent it entirely. "You are being incredibly selfish," my mother said, her voice cold. "This is an important day for your sister." "Every day is an important day for Vanessa," I said. "She'll be fine without me in the audience." My father appeared in the hallway, adjusting his tie. Richard Chen, 45, partner at a prestigious law firm, perpetually distracted. "What's going on, Helen? We need to leave." "Your daughter is refusing to come with us." He barely glanced at me. "Bailey, don't make this difficult." "I'm not making anything difficult. I'm just not going." "You don't need me there." That landed harder than I'd expected. My father actually looked at me for a moment, really looked, and I saw him struggle to find a counter-argument. Because the truth was, they didn't need me there. They'd never needed me there. I was set dressing, a prop to show that they were a complete family. "Fine," my mother said abruptly. "Stay home, but you're responsible for making your own lunch and don't even think about having anyone over. We'll discuss your attitude when we get back." They left. I stood in the empty house and felt the silence settle around me like a blanket. Peaceful. Safe. Then I got to work. First, I called Sarah. Yes, I could come over to work on the project. Her mom would be home. Perfect. Second, I went to my parents' home office and found my mother's medical records. She kept everything filed meticulously, including her own genetic testing results from 3 years ago. I remembered finding them in my first life after she died of ovarian cancer when I was 23, 2 years after my own death. The BRCA1 mutation was right there in black and white, marked as positive, with a recommendation for increased screening and consideration of preventive measures. She'd never told me. She'd never thought to test me, because that would have required thinking about me at all. I took photos of everything with my phone. Third, I spent 2 hours researching, making lists, planning. I had 6 years of knowledge about where my life had gone wrong. 6 years of mistakes to avoid, opportunities to seize, red flags to notice. But more than that, I had something I'd never had in my first life: permission to be selfish. Because I'd tried being selfless. I'd tried being good and quiet and undemanding, and it had gotten me exactly nowhere except an early grave. When I showed up at Sarah's house that afternoon, her mother took one look at me, at the photos on my phone, at the research I'd printed out, at the tears I couldn't quite hold back, and made an appointment with a genetic counselor for the following week. "Your parents know about this?" Mrs. Martinez asked gently. "My mom knows she has the mutation," I said. "She just never thought to mention it." Mrs. Martinez's expression hardened. "I see. Well, let's make sure you get the care you need, sweetheart." It was the first time in either of my lives that an adult had prioritized my health. I cried in her kitchen for 20 minutes while she made hot chocolate and told me about early intervention programs, about monitoring, about how we'd caught this so early that I'd never have to face what my grandmother did. That night, my parents came home flushed with success. Vanessa had been accepted to the elite academy. She would start intensive training immediately, 5 days a week, 4 hours a day, with private coaching on weekends. The tuition was astronomical. They'd have to take out a second mortgage. "Where were you?" my mother asked when she finally noticed me sitting at the kitchen table. "Sarah's house, working on our project." "You missed an incredible performance. Vanessa was outstanding." "I'm sure she was." My mother frowned, sensing something different in my tone but unable to place it. "Well, we're celebrating. We're going to Massimo's." Massimo's, Vanessa's favorite. Expensive Italian, 45 minutes away. "I'll stay here," I said. "I have homework." "Bailey, the mom," I said, looking up at her. "Do you remember taking me to get genetic testing?" She blinked. "What?" "Genetic testing. For the BRCA1 mutation. The one Grandma had. The one you have." The color drained from her face. How do you... I found your results in the filing cabinet. You were supposed to tell me. The genetic counselor would have recommended I be tested too. Did you just forget, or did you not think it was important? My father appeared in the doorway. Wait, what's going on? Bailey found my genetic testing results, my mother said, and for the first time in my life, she sounded uncertain. I was going to tell her when she was older. I'm 13, I said. Grandma was diagnosed at 45. That means she probably had cancer cells developing for years before that. Some people with BRCA1 mutations start getting screened in their 20s. Earlier, if there's a strong family history, which we have. You're being dramatic, my mother said, but her voice shook. You're fine. You're young and healthy. I died when I was 19, I thought. I died of the exact cancer you could have prevented if you'd paid attention to me for 5 minutes. But I didn't say that. Instead, I said, Mrs. Martinez is a nurse. She's making me an appointment with a genetic counselor. I'll get tested. If I have the mutation, we'll make a plan. Bailey, you can't just make medical appointments without consulting us, my father said. Why not? You made a medical appointment without me once, then ditched it to go to one of Vanessa's performances. The words came out before I could stop them, sharp and cutting. Oh, wait, that hasn't happened yet, has it? My parents stared at me. Vanessa, who had been upstairs, appeared at the top of the staircase, drawn by the sound of conflict. What's wrong with Bailey? She asked. Nothing, my mother said quickly, but nothing's wrong. Bailey is just going through something. Going through something. That was how she described my cancer later, too. Bailey's going through something. Like it was a phase. Like I'd chosen it. I'm going to my room, I said, standing up. Have fun at dinner. I spent the rest of the evening in my room, planning. I had 6 years before the lump would appear. 6 years to build a different life. 6 years to become someone who couldn't be ignored. The genetic testing came back positive. I had the BRCA1 mutation, just as I'd known I would. The genetic counselor recommended increased monitoring starting immediately, MRIs every 6 months, and a discussion about preventive measures once I was older, possibly a prophylactic mastectomy in my 20s. It was aggressive, it was comprehensive, it would save my life. My parents were shocked, then defensive, then finally guilty. But not guilty enough to change anything meaningful. They agreed to the monitoring schedule, agreed to pay for the appointments. But Vanessa's dance career still came first. It always came first. The first MRI was scheduled for a Tuesday at 4 p.m. Vanessa had a rehearsal that evening at 6 p.m. My mother spent the entire drive to the hospital checking her watch, sighing heavily, making it clear that this was a tremendous inconvenience. We'll probably hit traffic on the way back, she said. Vanessa's going to be late warming up. I said nothing. I'd learned in my first life that arguing was pointless. This time, I was learning something new. Detachment. The MRI was clear, perfect, exactly as it should be for a healthy 13-year-old, but we'd do another one in 6 months and another 6 months after that, watching, monitoring, ready to act at the first sign of abnormality. I was going to live. I was going to survive. And not because of my family, but in spite of them. Over the next 3 years, I systematically built a life that didn't depend on my parents' attention or approval. I threw myself into academics, into extracurriculars that didn't require parental involvement. I got a part-time job at 15, lying about my age to work at a local bookstore. I saved every penny. I applied to summer programs, prestigious ones, far away, with scholarships for low-income students. I checked the single-parent household box on the applications and wrote essays about raising myself. It wasn't technically true, but it wasn't technically false either. My parents fed and housed me, but in every meaningful way, I was on my own. I got into RSI, the Research Science Institute at MIT, the summer before my junior year. It was invitation only, highly competitive, and free. My parents signed the permission forms absently, barely reading them. That's nice, dear, my mother said. Vanessa has a summer intensive in New York that same month. I'm glad you'll have something to do. At RSI, I thrived. I worked on a project involving early cancer detection through AI analysis of genetic markers. The research was personal, viscerally, painfully personal, but I didn't tell anyone that. I just worked. I got second place in the national competition. My parents didn't come to the awards ceremony. They were at Vanessa's summer showcase. I stopped expecting them to come. I stopped inviting them. By the time I was 16, I had a clear path. Full scholarship to Stanford, major in biomedical engineering, research fellowship at a cancer center. I would dedicate my life to early detection, to prevention, to making sure no one else died the way I had. Vanessa, meanwhile, was struggling. The elite academy was brutal, and she was good but not exceptional. She'd peaked at 14, just like the girl who'd beaten her at the regional showcase. Her body was changing, puberty making her taller and curvier, her center of gravity shifting. She couldn't execute the same moves with the same precision. My parents poured more money into it. Better teachers, private choreographers, nutritionists, sports psychologists. They took out a third mortgage. My father took a loan against his retirement. I watched it happen with a strange sense of déjà vu. This was how it had gone in my first life, too. Vanessa's dance career had consumed the family's finances, their time, their emotional energy. And then, when it became clear she wasn't going to be a professional dancer, when she'd aged out and burned out and finally quit at 19, my parents had been devastated, financially ruined. In my first life, I'd been too sick by then to care. I'd been dying in a hospital room alone while they grieved the death of Vanessa's dreams. This time I was healthy and I was angry. I got into Stanford with a full ride, also MIT, also Johns Hopkins. I had my pick of the top biomedical engineering programs in the country. My parents took me out to dinner to celebrate, to Applebee's, not Massimo's, because money was tight. Vanessa sulked through the entire meal, upset because one of her competitions had been scheduled the same weekend as my high school graduation. "We'll have to miss it," my mother said, not looking at me. "I'm so sorry, Bailey, but this is a national competition. It could be Vanessa's big break." And there it was, the same pattern repeating. They would miss my graduation. They would choose her again, like they always did. But this time, I was ready. "That's fine," I said calmly. "You don't need to come." My mother blinked. "Bailey, don't be like that. You know we'd be there if we could." "No," I said. "You'd be there if you wanted to be. But you don't. And that's okay. I've accepted it." The table went silent. My father shifted uncomfortably. Vanessa looked between us, confused. "Bailey, that's not fair," my mother said. "We've supported you, but you've housed me," I interrupted. You've fed me. You've paid for my medical appointments, after a nurse had to shame you into it, but you've never supported me, and I'm done pretending otherwise." I stood up, leaving my half-eaten burger on the plate. "I'm going to Stanford. I have scholarships that cover everything. Tuition, room, board, even a stipend. You don't have to pay for anything. After graduation, I'm leaving and I'm not coming back." "Bailey, you're being ridiculous," my father said. "Every family has to make compromises, but..." "No," I said. "Compromise means everyone sacrifices something. I've been sacrificing my entire life. I'm done." I walked out of the restaurant. They didn't follow me. Graduation came and went. I walked across the stage alone, accepted my diploma, and smiled for the photographer. My name was called Bailey Chen, valedictorian, full scholarship to Stanford, future biomedical engineer. The audience applauded. My parents weren't there to hear it. Sarah and her family took me out to celebrate afterward. Mrs. Martinez gave me a beautiful necklace with a small pendant shaped like a DNA helix. "I'm so proud of you," she said, hugging me tight. "You're going to do incredible things." I cried on her shoulder, grieving for the family I'd never had and celebrating the future I was building anyway. Stanford was everything I'd dreamed. I dove into my research with single-minded focus. By my sophomore year, I'd co-authored 2 papers on AI-assisted cancer detection. By my junior year, I'd secured a grant to continue my work. By senior year, I developed a preliminary algorithm that could identify high-risk genetic patterns with 94% accuracy. My parents called occasionally. Awkward, stilted conversations where they asked about my grades and I gave one-word answers. They never asked about my research. They never asked about my health. The MRIs I still got every 6 months. The monitoring that had now been going on for 8 years. The constant vigilance that had kept me alive. Vanessa quit dancing at 19 just like she had in my first life. The timing was different. She'd lasted an extra year in this timeline. But the result was the same. She was burned out, injured, and tired. She enrolled in community college to study event planning. My parents called to tell me, their voices heavy with grief. "We invested everything," my mother said. "Everything. And now Vanessa gets to be normal," I said. "She gets to have a life." "That's not a tragedy, Mom." "You don't understand," she said. "She had such potential." "So did I said. "But you never noticed." I hung up. It would be 2 years before we spoke again. I graduated from Stanford at 22 with a PhD track lined up at Johns Hopkins. My cancer detection algorithm had been refined, tested, and was now being prepared for clinical trials. I'd published 6 papers, won 2 major research awards, and had standing offers from 3 different biotech companies. I was invited to speak at a conference on personalized medicine, the keynote speech in front of hundreds of doctors, researchers, and healthcare executives. I was the youngest speaker they'd ever invited. I almost didn't send the invitation to my parents. But some small, stubborn part of me, the part that was still 13 years old and desperate to be seen, put them on the guest list. They didn't respond. I told myself I didn't care. The conference was in San Francisco, at a massive hotel with glittering chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay. I wore a navy suit, my hair pulled back, looking every inch the serious researcher. My hands shook as I walked to the podium, but my voice was steady. 8 years ago, I began. I was diagnosed with a BRCA1 mutation. I was 13 years old. I had a 50 to 85% chance of developing breast cancer in my lifetime. Without early intervention, without aggressive monitoring, I likely would have been diagnosed in my late teens or early 20s. By then, it might have been too late. I clicked to the next slide, a graph showing survival rates based on stage at diagnosis. But I was lucky. I had access to genetic testing, I had a healthcare team that took my risk seriously, I had the resources and support to get MRIs every 6 months, to monitor every potential abnormality, and so at 22, I'm cancer-free. Not because I beat cancer, but because we caught the risk before it became a reality. Another click. A diagram of my algorithm's decision tree. The project I'm presenting today is built on that experience. It's an AI-assisted early detection system that analyzes genetic markers, family history, environmental factors, and lifestyle data to identify high-risk individuals years before symptoms appear. Our preliminary trials show a 94% accuracy rate in predicting cancer development within a 5-year window. I spoke for 45 minutes, detailing the research, the methodology, the potential applications. When I finished, the applause was thunderous. People stood. A woman in the front row was crying, The Q&A session, a doctor from Memorial Sloan Kettering asked about my personal connection to the research. "It's personal," I said. "Very personal. I built this because I know what it's like to be high risk. I know what it's like to live with the knowledge that your own body might betray you, and I know that early detection saves lives, mine included." After the session, I was swarmed by people wanting to discuss collaboration, funding, implementation. I exchanged business cards, made promises to follow up, and felt the weight of possibility settling on my shoulders. This was real. This was going to happen. We were going to save lives. In the crowd, I saw them, my parents, standing at the back of the room looking small and out of place among the scientists and doctors. My mother's face was streaked with tears. My father looked stunned. I didn't go to them. I let them wait while I finished my conversations, while I smiled and networked and basked in the recognition I'd earned. Let them see what I'd become without them. Finally, when the crowd had thinned, I walked over. "Bailey," my mother said, her voice breaking. I had no idea." "No," I agreed, John. You didn't. My father was staring at me like he was seeing me for the first time. You did all this? The research, the algorithm, the clinical trials? Yes. But how did we not know? My mother asked. How did we not see? You weren't looking, I said simply. You were never looking. The silence stretched between us, heavy with 8 years of missed moments, ignored achievements, and chosen absences. I'm sorry, my mother whispered. Bailey, I'm so sorry. We failed you. We chose Vanessa over you, again and again, and we nearly... Her voice broke. You could have died. You almost died, and we weren't there. No, I said, you weren't. Can you forgive us? My father asked. I looked at them, really looked at them, and saw two people who'd loved one child so much they'd forgotten they had another. Two people who'd poured everything into a dream that wasn't even theirs, sacrificing their daughter's health, happiness, and future at the altar of their younger child's potential. I don't know, I said honestly, but I know I don't need your forgiveness anymore. I don't need your approval or your attention or your pride. I built this life without you. I saved myself, and that has to be enough. My mother sobbed openly. My father put his arm around her, his own eyes red. We want to be in your life, he said. If you'll let us, we want to do better. Then start by asking, I said. Ask about my research. Ask about my health. Ask about me, not as your daughter who's supposed to fit into some slot in your life, but as a person, as Bailey. Ask who I am and actually listen to the answer. Who are you? My mother asked, wiping her eyes. I smiled, tired and sad and triumphant. I'm Dr. Bailey Chen. Well, almost. I start my PhD program next month. I'm a researcher, an innovator, a survivor. I'm someone who almost died because the people who were supposed to protect her were too busy looking the other way. And I'm someone who decided that was never going to happen again, to me or to anyone else. We went to dinner that night, not Massimo's, but a small Thai place near my hotel. We really talked for the first time in my life. It was awkward and painful and necessary. They told me about Vanessa, who was thriving in event planning, who was engaged to a kind man who owned a bakery. They told me about the financial struggles after the dance career ended, the debt they were still paying off. I told them about Stanford, about my research, about the MRIs that had all come back clear for 8 years running. I told them about Mrs. Martinez, who'd been more of a mother to me than my own. I told them about the loneliness of winning awards with no one there to celebrate, of graduating at the top of my class with no family in the audience. We can't get those years back, my father said. We can't undo what we did. No, I agreed, you can't. But we'd like to try, my mother said. We'd like to be there for the rest of it if you'll let us. I thought about my first life, about dying alone in a hospital room while they slept. I thought about the bitterness I'd carried, the rage that had fueled me through this second chance. I thought about revenge and justice and the difference between the two. You can try, I said finally, but I'm not promising anything. You have to earn it. They nodded, accepting the terms. It was more than I'd expected to give them. Over the next 2 years, they tried. They came to my presentations, my award ceremonies, my paper publications. They learned about my research, asked questions, showed genuine interest. My mother went to therapy to work through her guilt. My father started a college fund for my future children, the ones I might have, the ones who would never be ignored the way I'd been. It wasn't perfect. There were setbacks, arguments, moments when old patterns resurfaced, but it was progress. Vanessa and I reconnected slowly. She called to apologize, crying, saying she'd never realized how much they'd sacrificed me for her. I forgave her. She'd been a child too, shaped by the same parents, just in a different way. We'd both been damaged by their choices, just differently. The clinical trials for my algorithm were successful. At 24, I defended my PhD dissertation to a standing ovation. At 25, my research was published in Nature. At 26, the FDA approved the algorithm for clinical use. Hospitals started implementing it. Insurance companies began covering it. Lives were being saved. And then, anakin memam 27 at a conference in Boston, I met Dr. Jessica Liu. She was an oncologist, brilliant and compassionate, with a laugh that made me feel like I'd known her forever. We bonded over our research, over late-night conversations about medicine and ethics, and the weight of holding people's lives in your hands. 6 months later, she kissed me in her apartment, soft and hesitant and perfect. A year after that, she proposed with a ring she'd designed herself, a DNA helix wrapping around a small diamond. We got married in a small ceremony in Golden Gate Park. My parents were there, sitting in the front row, crying tears of joy and regret. Vanessa was my maid of honor, beautiful in a simple blue dress, no longer the dancer but the sister I'd always needed. Mrs. Martinez walked me down the aisle because she was the one who'd saved my life all those years ago in a kitchen over hot chocolate. At the reception, my mother gave a speech. She talked about second chances, about learning to see what was right in front of you, about the daughter she'd almost lost and was grateful every day to still have. Bailey taught me that love isn't about grand gestures, she said, her voice shaking. It's about showing up. It's about paying attention. It's about choosing every day to see the people you love and let them know they matter. I failed at that for so many years, but she gave me another chance, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to deserve it. I cried. Jessica held my hand. My father came over and hugged me, whispering apologies into my hair. It wasn't revenge, exactly. I hadn't set out to punish them, hadn't crafted some elaborate scheme to make them suffer, but I'd built a life so full and so bright that they couldn't ignore me anymore. I'd become someone impossible to overlook, and in the end, that was better than revenge. That was victory. 5 years later, I stood in my lab at Johns Hopkins, surrounded by my team of researchers, and looked at the latest statistics. Our algorithm had been used to screen over 2 million people. We'd identified 15,000 high-risk individuals. Of those, 800 had been diagnosed with early-stage cancers. Cancers that were caught in time, treated successfully, lives saved. 800 people who wouldn't die the way I'd died in my first life. My phone rang. It was my mother. "Hi, Mom," I said, and I meant it warmly. "Hi, sweetheart. I just wanted to check in. You said you had a follow-up MRI today. How did it go?" "Clean," I said, smiling. 15 years and counting. "Thank God," she breathed. I was worried. "I know, Mom. Thank you for asking." We talked for a few more minutes about Jessica's new position, about Vanessa's pregnancy, about the family dinner we had planned for next weekend. Normal things. Family things. When I hung up, I looked around my lab, at the screens showing data from thousands of patients, at my team, brilliant and dedicated, working to save lives, at the photos on my desk, Jessica and me on our honeymoon, my parents at our wedding, Vanessa holding her newborn daughter. I thought about my first life, about dying at 19 with nothing but regret and bitterness. I thought about being given a second chance and using it not for revenge but for redemption, my own and eventually theirs. I thought about the girl I'd been, invisible and ignored, and the woman I'd become, impossible to miss. And I realized I'd won. Not because I'd punished them, but because I'd refused to die. Not because I'd made them suffer, but because I'd built something beautiful out of the ashes of that first life. I'd chosen myself, I'd saved myself, and in doing so, I'd saved thousands of others. That was better than revenge. That was everything.